it just feels like time is a flat circle, and sooner or later, everybody leaves and they move on to the next thing. And I'm just here all alone holding this bag of pain. I can't put it down, and it just consumes me.
Hey there, my name is Sean, and this is Suicide Noted. On this podcast, I talk with suicide attempt survivors and ID eaters so that we can hear their stories. Every year around the world, millions of people, many millions, try to take their own lives, and we almost never talk about it. We certainly don't talk about it enough, and when we do talk about it, when we do engage, most of us are not very good at it. So one of my goals with this podcast and the tour is to have more conversations, and hopefully better conversations with survivors, in large part to help more people in more places, hopefully feel a little less shitty and a little less alone. Now, if you are a survivor, a suicide attempt survivor, an ideator, and you'd like to talk, I'd love to talk with you. Please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast or help out, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can check the show notes, the podcast description, the website. You can answer this week's poll on Spotify, or rate and or review this podcast. Suicide Noted, of course, on Apple. Quick update. Finally, we had our event in Arizona, in Tucson, and it went really well. I met with past guest Reggie. We had a nice, active little audience at a local public library. It was our last event. As I've said, it was our 15th event, as I planned. 7,000 miles, 30 or so past guests, a few that weren't past podcast guests, but became Suicide Noted guests. A lot of great people I met along the way, a lot of cool driving. I'll give you a more comprehensive update soon, but I wanted to let you know yesterday I finished it up. Appreciate all your support very, very much. Really do. Finally, we are talking about suicide on this podcast, and I don't hold back. My guests don't hold back, not typically, so please take that into account before you listen or as you listen. But I do hope you listen, because there is so much to learn. Today, I am talking with David. David lives in New York, and he is a suicide attempt survivor. David, hi. David in New York City.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I was born here, and I lived here when I was a kid, and I moved around a lot. And I just recently moved back here about 5 years ago, and I enjoy it. I enjoy being a grown-up here. I should say that.
It's like a wink, wink. New Yorkers get it. Nobody else does. All right, so you reached out to me last year, and then I got an email about a year later, meaning recently. So tell me, I'm curious, because I'm always curious how people find it and what they're dealing with at the time when they look for something like this kind of thing. So what was happening last year and then more recently that we're talking?
I'm 52 years old, so I've been dealing with this issue, I would guess since I was, around 20 or 21. There's a lot of things in life I can handle. But in terms of day-to-day stresses and so forth, in fact, people have told me that I can be pretty good in an emergency. But there's some certain things in my life that I've just can become very overwhelming. And they all have to do with basically my romantic relationship status and so forth, and the heartbreak and all that kind of stuff. Just certainly not unique. For me, when I get into those situations, can become very overwhelming.
Yeah.
To the point where the pain of these things becomes the only thing that I feel, and it blocks out everything else. And there are a lot of good things in my life. I've worked very hard. I live pretty well. I have a successful career. I live in a great city. I have a son who lives in the area, and we have a great relationship, and he's doing very well. He's looking at some Ivy League schools and stuff. So I've got a lot of really good things going for me. I'm in very good health. But when certain dominoes fall, none of that matters. None of that matters. And it's like the sun just gets blocked out, and I just want it all to go away. And that started with me, I guess, 20 or 21. So it's been quite a while. And I had a first girlfriend, first love and so forth. And we were together for about 3 years, and then we broke up. Very common story. Certainly nothing unique about that. I just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Really couldn't handle it. Then that was the first time in my life I became truly suicidally depressed. I would get depressed from time to time. And, even as a kid and so forth, I wouldn't describe myself as like the happiest kid. Some of that may have been external factors. Some of it may have just been who I am. And I'm saying that because my kid has actually always been a pretty happy kid. So I do have a frame of reference, unfortunately, for that. And then that pattern has repeated itself. It's repeated itself. There was that relationship and, and I would go on out dates with other people and, and went through periods where I was kind of afraid to get too close for a variety of reasons. And then a few years later, after college, I was living in San Francisco and I met somebody else and I fell in love and we moved she was a European woman. We moved over there for a few years, got married, and we were married for 10 years and had a kid and everything. And then that relationship ended. And then that really pushed me to the brink as well. That was because really everything fell apart at that point. My career was destroyed. I lost my dream job. I just couldn't even function.
And when you're 20 and in your 30s, I realize, aren't the same situation, not the same ages and all that. But when you say, I was going to ask you, like, when you deal with that stuff, can you work?
I think that's a good question. It's been a little different. There's been 3 times in my life where I've been dealing with it, and I think maybe I get a little bit better at it every time.
Yeah.
So there's been maybe a slight uptick in growth every decade. I'm typically a pretty high functioning depressive. I don't really just spend too much time, lying in bed with the shades drawn. I will fake it till you make it. I will go to work and so forth, do my best to put on a happy face. But then when I come home, it's just, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this another day? Like, this is not worth it. There is no light at the end of this tunnel. Why am I even going through this? There are times where I would just walk across the Golden Gate Bridge, just think to myself, and just stare over the edge. The things that changes in my feeling about these things is that when I would get into the suicidal ideations, say, what would this really be like? Really have these very sort of vivid, somewhat graphic images in my head when I was 20 years old. I had a gun in my life at that point, so there were times where I would just imagine the back of my head exploding. In California, there were times where I would imagine, I know the way that from a physics standpoint, the way water compresses like concrete when you hit it at a certain speed. And I would just imagine some silence and then a smack and then everything's over. Or I would imagine hanging myself. I fought competitively before, so I've been choked out before, and just that feeling of the lights going out. So a typical person who's not in that state, those things would probably sound very alarming, to say the least. When I'm in that state, it just seems like a relief.
Right.
It seems like it would just be a big exhale. Like I just don't have to do it anymore. But I've been dealing with them better now, as I've grown as a person over the years.
It's really weird, actually, man, because when you were describing, I would imagine this, I would imagine that. I actually wrote a play, like a solo show kind of thing, for my buddy's death. Your choice of words and verbs and verbiage was like almost identical to what I chose for my own. Because he shot himself in the mouth. Like I could imagine all those things. The difference of doing it is a huge difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Suicide's no joke, man.
There's no turning back from it.
Early 20s, first big relationship. I imagine there's a pattern set, but you don't know it's going to be a pattern at that point.
Correct. Even on a certain level, right? I truly believe, like, well, this is for the best. Like, this will be tough, but I know in my heart this isn't the relationship forever. And,
right.
I know there's something better out there for me, and really telling myself that, and on a certain level, maybe even objectively knowing that that's probably true. But that's logic. That's something different. That's not emotion.
Completely different.
So I don't have anything bad to say about her. I just, I got into a point where I was just not ready. And that was sort of goes back to a lot of issues with my childhood. My mother had her own pretty serious mental health issues, although she's a very, very brilliant person. She has multiple master's degrees and PhDs and so forth. But is truly just suffers with mental illness and always felt very overwhelmed by the concept of parenting. And as a result, I don't really like to blame things on my mom. That's such a trope. But every time I got to a stepping stone in life, I was never ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I went from kindergarten to first grade, when I went from like elementary school to junior high, when I went from junior high to high school, when I went from hanging out with my friends to having girlfriends, and when I went from high school to college, like not having a job to being in the workforce. And every one of those little steps, I failed dramatically and had to pick myself up and sort of figure it out on my own. And I was never really prepared for any of those things. And of course I learned from that. And I've tried very hard with my son to, make sure he has a greater understanding of how the world works. You're doing grown-up things with very grown-up emotions, but in many ways you still have the mind of a child.
I don't know if this is true that men tend to mature later, because I don't know who's measuring this and who's coming up with this shit. But if there's any truth to it, that's even more like, yeah, maybe in the early 20s, we're fucking idiots. Just we don't know what we're doing.
Well, when you start having sex with someone that you love, it's a very emotionally charged thing. There's nothing you can do to prepare you for that.
Right.
The only way to get prepared for that, the only way to learn that is to go through it.
From my own perspective, 100% relate. For men to talk about certain things, and I think what you're talking about with respect to this profoundly massive response or feel is common, but not, it's man up, bro.
Yeah, no, I think people don't want to talk about it. I was struggling with some things in my own life a little while ago, and I was listening to the podcast, and I don't think anybody comes to your podcast because they're feeling great about themselves.
No, there's a few.
I didn't listen to every single one, but I didn't really hear too many people talking about what I was going through with like the heartbreak and the so forth, what was really pushing me over the edge. So at one point, and I was trying to put things back together and sort of walk back this breakup and so forth. And I remember one day I was sitting there and I had a gun and I just staring at it with the slide locked open. I remember this vividly. And I pulled out one bullet, a Winchester Black Talon jacketed hollow point, 960 feet per second. I don't remember the name of somebody I met 3 days ago, but I remember this. Some things are just, the memories of them are just so vivid still. I remember the tactile feeling, putting that single round in the chamber, dropping the slide, using the decocker, the feel of the weight in my hand of that gun, of the clicking sound of the decocker, just sitting there and staring at it and then flipping the safety off. Really just being at that point, it was like, okay. And then for some reason, am I going to do this or not? I was like, or am I going to do this now? Or I said, no, maybe I'm not going to do it at all. So I put the gun down and I went to work. I was doing my culinary apprenticeship at the time. At that point, my memory gets a little fuzzy. I don't remember exactly what that day at work was like. Probably not great, but I got through it, I guess. And I don't know if it was maybe that night or the following or a couple of days later or so forth. I, had gone over to my ex-girlfriend's place. She was over there, and then and then we've been broken up for a couple of months at this point. And she was over there with a new guy she was dating.
No.
Nothing wrong with that. That was it. And she was really trying to be kind and nice and sympathetic and empathetic and all of these things. And she wanted just to talk to me and she wanted me to calm down and so forth. She came outside and I turned around and I grabbed her. No, it wasn't great. I grabbed her by the elbows as her elbows were down by her waist. So I grabbed her and I maybe gave her a bit of a shake. I don't want it to seem like I was being overly violent. I'm not saying it was acceptable, but I was, and I was probably more imposing in that and scary in that moment than I meant to be. And I said, there's something to the effect of, this is hell and I'm never getting out of it. And I left. And that really scared her. Went back to my apartment and I was living by myself. She had a couple of roommates. I was living by myself. That's when things really got bad. That's when so I'm sitting in my apartment and I'm kneeling and I pull out a knife, one of my knives from cooking. So it's a good one, like a 7-inch fillet knife. And I turned my left forearm over and on the top side of my left forearm, I cut my left forearm over. And then I just sat there and then I did it again. Now I'm sitting in this room, sitting in the dark, blood all over the place. And I have a gun.
And this is when you're in your earliest 20s, right?
I think I was either 20 or 21. And I called up my best friend. I called up Steve. Steve got on the phone. Then Steve's mom got on the phone because growing up, I spent a lot more time at Steve's place. I think I did them my own. So I had very good relationships with all of them. And they really kind of like talked me down.
Mm-hmm.
But, and it was a lot of just, I don't know if I can do this. This is not worth it. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. As they were on the phone with me, then there was a knock at the door, and of course it was the police. So I opened the door and I kept my left hand behind the door so they couldn't see all the blood. And I just talked to them for a minute. Now I look out and there's 3 or 4 cops like at my door. My ex-girlfriend, she called. She knew that I had guns.
Right.
And I think she was legitimately scared. And I think she was legitimately scared for my safety, and rightfully so. So she called. It's kind of trying to be coy, like, oh, these cops won't think that they will want to see both of my hands, right? I'll just keep one hand behind the door.
Yeah.
And then they said, hey, we need to see the other hand. And they said, we just need to make sure you don't have a weapon in that hand. So as soon as I pulled my hand out, and then there's just blood all over the place, immediately all these rubber gloves went on, all the cops and the paramedics.
Yeah.
And the paramedics said, we have to get you to the hospital because if you don't, this is going to get infected and you're going to lose your arm.
Wow.
And then they said, do you have any guns? And I said, something to the effect of no. And then they said, what about the Beretta? And I said, oh, yeah, that one, because my ex-girlfriend knew what kind of gun I had. So I gave them my guns and they took me to the hospital. They stitched me up and they called my mom. She was a clinical psychologist at this point.
Oh, dear.
For all of her issues, right? And she made the drive from our hometown. And, I wish I could say that she really rose to the occasion, but not so much. It was more just like, me take you back home and we'll calm things down. I'll just stick you in a therapist's office and kind of forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at some point in the hospital, like I kind of just fell asleep, maybe an hour, maybe 3 hours. I don't know. But I remember like waking up and just thinking to myself, this is so surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Like nothing just seemed real. It's not like I was chained to the bed or in like some padded cell or anything like that. I was just sitting there, and at that point, I guess they sensed that I had kind of calmed down. And I think maybe this is also the part of me that's good in an emergency. I can kind of calm things down and like talk to people very well in these situations. It just, nothing seemed real. And I was like, why is this happening? Why am I still here? If people talk about, the out of body experiences, it's like you're seeing yourself in third person and so forth. I would say that that's probably how it felt at that time. And so I had to put everything on hold and I had to move back home for the summer, kind of go through a lot of therapy, which I don't really think did much. I got together enough so that I was able to go back for the fall semester, kind of rejoin things. And then that's when I sort of, went through a phase where I was like, okay, maybe I'm over this, but, I was never really, and I would start dating people and hooking up with people and trying to make more friends. But the pain of that was always really there.
Mm-hmm.
My anxiety was always very high. If I were to see this, my ex-girlfriend out somewhere, and I mean, even though I think I was doing well, and one night I was in a bar and a couple of friends, and I looked out the window of the bar, and there was I saw her. She just got out of there, and she went to the bodega, and she went in and got into a car with a guy, and left off. And I was just like that, and that just really set me off, and I probably got just way too drunk that night. But it took me a long, long time, and I think I never really got over it. And then even though life would go on and I became I would never describe myself as happy, but I would describe myself as functional. Took the next step of my life and I moved out to San Francisco and I was there for a couple of years and I was further along, I wasn't really depressed, but I was never that great. And I was always felt like I was just one romantic relationship away from if I could just have a girlfriend, if I could just get to that point, I would be happy. So I'm going to digress for just a second and say, because this is something that I've dealt with my whole life. If a woman walks into a therapist's office and says, this is my issue, I have been force-fed these beauty standards throughout my entire life. Unless I look like this very sort of unattainable image, then I feel like I don't have any self-worth. And that causes me a lot of pain and depression. And that's terrible. And that's a horrible thing about society. And society has grown a lot over the last several decades to make that a much more acceptable thing for women to talk about. And also with that, the therapy community has grown as to where they say, okay, well, if this is what you're dealing with, like we have a lot of established roads we can go down. And if a man walks into a therapist's office and says, I've been fed this steady diet of bullshit from the time I was a little kid, watching TV and from seeing magazines and so forth, that has told me, not that I need to look a certain way, that my value, my sense of self-worth is tied up with who is the person I'm with. I need to be with a woman who checks all of these boxes, who's attractive, who's this, who's that, who's sexy, and all these things. So if I don't have that, then I feel really depressed and I feel like my life isn't worth living and so forth. And I think a lot of people look at that situation and say, what a fucking douchebag. You are everything that is wrong with society, right? And it's like, well, I'm not really everything that's wrong with society, and it's all fun and games, until somebody's got a gun at their head, right? It's like, well, people are dying over this type of thing. And I don't think I'm the only person who's ever felt that way.
No, for sure not.
So when I met my future wife, I was like, wow, this is it. Like, she's gorgeous and she's great and she loves me. I moved to Prague and we got married and we were together for a decade and we had a kid and I really thought everything was set. And right, like I had gotten my dream job. We had upgraded our apartment in San Francisco and now we had like this beautiful, like rent-controlled place in San Francisco with like a garage. And we were talking, and we wanted to have another baby. And then as I was getting ready for one of the trips I had to take for work to Tokyo, my wife told me, she said, I think we should have a trial separation. And I was like, what are you talking about? Really felt like it was out of the blue. in hindsight, I did see some things, and I will say, I was not the perfect husband. I wasn't cheating on her. I wasn't abusive. I wasn't gambling away our 401k or doing drugs or anything like that. But, it's no secret that chefs don't have the best work-life balance.
Right.
And we can be very ambitious, very driven people. And a lot of other things can not get the attention they deserve. And part of that is a way that I hadn't grown yet in that way to be as present in the family life in that way. I was just working a lot. Although I was working towards it, I felt like things were getting better. I was really working towards a lot of these things, and I was trying to get my kitchen in a situation where I could not work at night as much and so forth. But it just takes time.
Yeah.
And we were talking about having another baby, and at that point, she said, "Well, if this doesn't work out, I just think we'll be okay with one." And I said, "Well, it's your choice. You're the one who's got to actually be pregnant." A couple of months later, she said, "You want to do this trial separation?" And I said, I said, "Well, what do you really want with this?" I said, "Do you want to be should we be seeing other people or something?" And she said, "I think that's something we should be doing." And I was like, and I said, is there somebody else you're seeing now? Or is there somebody you're thinking about? And she said, no. And I could tell she was lying.
Sure.
Because you're married to somebody for a decade,
Damn, that must have been, hold up, David. That must have been fucking beyond gut wrenching.
Yes, I would describe that as beyond gut wrenching. Yeah, no, it was brutal. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to take this business trip to Tokyo, and when I get back, I'm going to stay. I'll just stay with a friend, and we'll try to figure it out. And we'll go to some couples therapy and so forth. And she agreed to the couples therapy, and and I remembered thinking to myself the night before I left to Tokyo, and I would tell her, I was like, there's so much love in this house. Look at everything we've built together. We have this amazing child in the next room. What else in life is worth just blowing all this up for?
Yeah.
What could it possibly be?
Yeah.
What about this relationship is so deeply unworkable? And then I figured it out later, that there was a guy she dated, before we had dated, and he was still around. He was kind of in our lives. He was a friend of mine. He's a nice guy, and I guess at some point those two just reconnected. And they're together now. They're remarried now,
Oh, wow. They got back together.
Yeah, they did. That was really it. There were times during that where I was really focused on, the couples therapy and so forth. The reason why I moved out and didn't have her move out was because I said to myself, she has to also take care of this 2-year-old child. As a single mom, it's going to be much more difficult for her to take this relationship she's having with somebody else and actually start having sex with this person. Because I knew once that happened, the odds of saving the marriage would be much, much lower. So I wanted to get into the couples therapy and really try to fix this and walk us back from the cliff. We went to the couples therapy, I think once or twice. And then the worst thing happened. So our couples therapist said, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. And it was during that in-between time that they hooked up.
Right.
That was it. She was like, there was no coming back at that point.
She just told you?
No, she didn't tell me, but I figured it out. Now it gets to this stage where it's like, what are we doing? How am I going to, now you got to figure out how we do custody and all this other stuff. And, and I was still I didn't have a place to live. I was still staying on my friend's couch, and you can see me right now. I'm about 160 pounds. My weight's kind of always been around that, even this is going back about 10 years ago, maybe yes. And I've always been a pretty fit guy. I stopped eating. I lost over 30 pounds in a month.
From just the anxiety or whatever around all
just anxiety and stress. When she told me she wanted a separation, I was like, it set off these dominoes where I was like, I didn't think anything could hurt that badly. I really didn't. And then I'm in Tokyo. And then it just gets so weird, Now it's like I'm in Tokyo and I'm in this hotel room and I'm on my computer. So I logged into one of her online accounts and I saw a chat she had between one of her coworkers where I figured out what was going on, that she was really into somebody, and I was like, well, this is a new level of pain. This can't get any worse, And then I came back from Tokyo and I was a wreck, and I'm living on my buddy's couch, and then and then we went through that thing as I mentioned, where we were going to couples therapy, and then in between our second and third couples therapy, they started having sex, and I was like, well, then I found out about that. It's this can't get any worse. I can't imagine anything could be more painful than this. When you're with somebody monogamously for 12 years, and then all of a sudden that's broken, you can't unring that bell. Nothing takes it back.
that's really what got me fired, because I was at work every day in a job where the expectations were very, very high. I mean, this is one of the top restaurants like in the entire country. And here I am, like I've worked my way up my whole life, and I'm in the kitchen and everybody's looking at me and I'm trying to coordinate all these people. All I can think about is I just can't get the vision out of my head of my wife of 10 years having sex with another guy. And when that's in your head, and the problem with that is that there's a finite amount of space in my head. Does table 33 have their dessert forks yet? Because I need to send it out. Like, that's not in my head. It's like this cuckoo's like burning something. It's like, that's not in my head. And all these other things aren't in my head about work. So I got fired. And I really had a meltdown. I really had a meltdown there, and I got fired. And my biggest fear at that point, I was like, God, I really didn't want him in my son's life. They were together and dating for like a year or so before he ever met my son. And then eventually, like, they did, and I was like, that is like, I didn't think anything good. And then was like, that's like another like level of pain. I'm like, fuck. And then I got that call saying, okay, we're moving to New Orleans. They're all going to live together like a new family now. The nightmare is coming true. Not only is it my wife, but now it's also my son. And like, now this person is going to be raising my son. But the problem with that is like, if she hadn't monkey branched into that relationship, it would feel different. If we had broken up and then she had just met somebody, Bill Parcells, the football coach, once said, he said, you are what your record says you are. And when I think about this guy who used to be my friend, again, like, because I'd known him, if you engage in behavior like that, I mean, I hate to sound so basic about it, but I mean, like, if that's not a home wrecker, I don't know what is. You got to live with that. You got to own that. You destroyed a family. You destroyed the family of a 2.5-year-old child. It's hard for me to view this person as a good person. And then especially seeing the damage it was causing to my life and giving them every chance to walk it back, but they just weren't going to do it.
Much as you try to like, I'll put myself into work and and I was still exercising. I was going to the gym and I was boxing and doing some other stuff and trying to spend time with friends. And I was doing all of those things, but nothing was going to work. And then at one point when things got really bad, I was over at, my ex-wife's house, and because my son was there, and she said, I'm going to go have brunch with some friends. And I said, well, I'll just come over there and I'll take care of Caleb. At this point, like, I still had some stuff over there. I mean, it was a little bit of a different time. And I was waiting for her to get ready, and I went into the bathroom, and I was feeling pretty bad. I just sort of like splashed some water on my face. And at this point, I really hadn't eaten in a long time, and I hadn't been sleeping well. I was having nightmares. I passed out. And when I collapsed, I hit my head on the side of the tub, and I just laid in there on the floor for a while, staring up at the ceiling. And I was like, was my head bleeding? Like, am I concussed? Like, I don't know. And eventually I just kind of got up and I just came out. You would think there would be like hey, is everything okay in the bathroom? Kind of a moment, but there wasn't. I went through it, and then I came out and like said, okay, go to brunch, and I'll just hang out here with our son and, go to the park or something. And my brain went to this place where I was having this, maybe fantasy is the right word, that because I knew that she was going to be there with a group of people, and that the guy she'd been seeing, her now husband, was going to be there too. Seeing me at that point, I said to myself, I had this fantasy that this is going to be the time where she's going to go to him and she's just going to say, I can't go through with this. This is just hurting somebody else too much. I can't live with myself knowing I'm hurting somebody this month. And then she came home, and shockingly, that fantasy did not come true.
And so, and this is all connected, obviously, suicide noted, to your own...
There's a lesson I learned much later in life, and that's that, you can't want someone into wanting you. You can't want someone so badly that they're just going to want you more.
Doesn't work that way.
It just doesn't work that way.
No.
And also, there's another thing that, there's a sense oftentimes when I've been in these deepest pits of despair, if I could just get somebody to see things my way, right? If only they really knew how much this was hurting me, right? If I knew that I was doing something that was really hurting somebody else, not just irritating them, but it was really hurting them. Whatever it was, as a human being, I would have to stop doing it, right? I couldn't go through with that if I knew that I was really hurting somebody, especially somebody that I loved. You get to this point where it's like, if I could only find the right way to communicate how she's hurting me, if only she could see how this is really hurting me, then she would have to change her behavior.
Are you a hardcore ruminator or perseverator or whatever word like that? The spinning nonstop thing? Yeah.
Yeah, of course I am. So if only I could get her to see it, right? If she could only just see here I am. It's like I just passed out in the bathroom from malnutrition.
Yeah.
you can only imagine. I'm gaunt, like I'm shaking at times,
Yeah.
just shaking uncontrollably. But people are not going to change their behavior based on those things. If it's something they really want to do, they're just not going to. It's just the way it is. I'm not even placing a value judgment on it anymore, even though just because it's something that maybe I would like to think to myself that I couldn't do it, but I don't know.
We don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. And then as we're going through the divorce procedures, and I get called in the office one day, and then I'm fired. My dream job.
I know where this is headed, my friend.
Yeah, and I had just moved into an apartment and so forth. My assets were frozen because we were going through a divorce, and things were really tough. There were definitely so many times where I was just like, why am I doing this?
What was your coping? How did you get through?
I was drinking and I was smoking weed. And there were definitely times where I would just get really stoned and have a couple of beers in my apartment. But never when I was with Caleb. When I was with my son, I was always completely sober.
Okay.
But I tell you, Sunday night or whatever, I'd take him back to his mom's, and then, I would just be like, okay, now I can just get fucked up by myself in my apartment. And there was quite a bit of that. Yeah, and I was functional. I went out, I got another job and had bounced around from job to job a bit. And then I got into this next stage, which was this sort of surviving. There's times where I feel where the depression feels much more palpable.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'm surviving.
When we go back to the 20s, the early 20s, do you consider that a suicide attempt, that first one?
I do.
In this second major breakup, how close did you come beyond perhaps thoughts?
So I was in the planning phase. I had written notes.
Okay.
I had researched what it would take to buy a gun in California, looked for places where I could hang myself in my apartment.
What do you think stopped you?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. There was no lightning bolts that just hit me and said, don't do it, It's always that hinge of doubt, when you're doing something that is truly irreversible. Is this going to be the right decision? Am I going to regret this on the other side?
And then you had an additional layer of your father. Not the same if you don't have, I don't have kids. I don't have to think of that shit at all. And that's a whole other level that I'm sure I know just from my conversation with people that they struggle with hard when they're thinking about this stuff.
They do. And in fact, it's one of the things that I've always said about having children later in life. I have a very good friend of mine in New Orleans who lost her mom to cancer when she was, 15 or 16 or something like that. And it fucked her up. Fucks her up to this day. She's almost 40 now. Every Mother's Day, she's like curled up in a ball and crying. And, it really just changed her life in such a profound way. So being a father, that is part of it. I don't want my son to lose his father. And there's been times where I've really thought that to myself. When I'm really depressed, as I say to myself, I just wish my son was older and that my parents were dead.
Yep.
So that I could just fucking kill myself.
Let us connect the dots if we can, just for the sake of time. So late 30s, post-marriage, survival mode, and then connect us in your 40s to today.
So at some point, my ex-wife, she decided that she was going to go back to school and she was going to move to New Orleans. I decided I was going to move to New Orleans too. I had a professional connection there from my time in San Francisco. So I wasn't crazy about the idea, but I did it. And I was like, well, I want to be close to my son. I want him to be getting on a plane 3 times a year when he can be seeing me every week. So I moved to New Orleans. I took a job I wasn't crazy about, but it was practical. Started dating some people. But that whole time, and this is now a period of 4 or 5 years, I would say there was really every day I just woke up with a tremendous amount of pain. It felt like all the love that was in my heart was just ripped out and replaced with a smoldering ember of pain that just never went away. And no matter what I did, it could get in the background sometimes, but it never went away. The thing that would kind of always make it go in the background a little bit would be if I was dating somebody and I would kind of, hook up with somebody and that would kind of mask the pain a little bit, but it never really went away until I met the next person in my life who I really fell in love with. We started dating and I was like, wow, this is it. I really love this person. I really want to be with this person. She's amazing.
Wow.
And then I finally felt like I could manage all that pain from my divorce. I felt like I finally had it under control because I had this other love in my life that just gave me so much strength. Then my son moved, and then my ex-wife said, okay, time to go to grad school. I'm going to Columbia. So I was like, fuck, I was like, I can't, I bought a house. I'm dating somebody. We haven't for a year, but we haven't moved in together. I can't just up and leave. So I stayed behind for a year. My girlfriend moved in. And then I decided, well, what am I going to do? And I said, well, maybe I'm going to move to Tokyo. I went to Tokyo for a while and I worked at a few places with my girlfriend and we're talking about moving there. I met a chef there who was going to open up a restaurant in New York. I said, well, this is great. Well, I'm just going to we'll move to New York, be close to my son, can start over there. COVID happened. That thing got delayed and everything. So I eventually had to make my own way. professionally, I'm doing pretty good. That relationship, though, of that woman I love very much, she developed some pretty serious issues with her drinking. Her drinking got out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And we broke up and she moved out and that was really tough. And we were but for a while, it was like, well, maybe we could just date, but not live together. Maybe that's the sweet spot. And then she started having problems with her roommates. And I said, well, just come back over here for a couple of days. Just let that situation die down. And that's when I saw how bad her drinking had really gotten. It was really out of control and she couldn't really work and so forth. And I started reaching out to her family and I said, you gotta get help. And I said, I'm financially, I'm not in a point where I can just pay. I can't pay for rehab. I don't have 50 grand burn a hole in my pocket. I'm just coming out of COVID and so forth. I'm still rebuilding myself financially from that. And there's a lot of guilt with that too, because we've been together for some point and I never stopped loving her. But I said to myself, gosh, what if we had just been married, Like if we had just been married, she'd be on my health insurance plan. And then that would have been this lower barrier to get her into the help that she needed. She wouldn't be dependent on her parents or on like Medicaid or whatever. But eventually she got the help. She went down to Florida and she got into a rehab center. And I really thought she was coming back. I said, okay, this is going to be great. She's going to come back. And at this point, like I'm not an alcoholic. So for me, not drinking is easy. I'm lucky. So I really thought she was coming back. And then, as we were getting closer to that, she said, I think I need to go live in this sort of halfway house in Denver. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, Jesus, here we go again, We were kind of in touch and she was doing really well. And, and I was still talking to her family a little bit. But then, every once in a while she would relapse. She would have to go like a detox for a couple of days. And that was really hard, And then at this point, now I'm back. Now I'm back professionally. And I talked to her and she wasn't doing that great. I said, well, I'm going to come out there and see you. It just wasn't really going that great for her. And, but I really love her and like seeing her that way. And, but it was good. It was a good trip. And I said, okay, I'm going to come back and see you again in a couple of weeks. Maybe a month or so, come back, see where things go. She disappeared. She ghosted me. And I was like, that was really terrifying. Messaging her and I'm calling her and like, there's just crickets and, and I even sent her like a little video of like my son's birthday and it was just nothing. I was like, okay. And then eventually I reached out to her parents and I was like, hey, is she okay? And they're like, well, I talked to her. She's okay. And I was like, well, I guess she just doesn't want to talk to me. I kind of knew what was going on. I figured she probably just started dating somebody else. And we didn't talk for a while. I just let it sit for a couple of months. I texted her and I said, what's going on? I haven't heard from you a bit. And then she messaged me back a picture of us together in Tokyo. And then she said, hey, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And she said, I have to tell you something. And I said, I know what you're going to tell me. She said, what am I going to tell you? I said, you're going to tell me that you're seeing another guy. And she said, I'm pregnant. I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, well, I'm going to get an abortion. And we started talking and one thing led to another. And I just said, do you need me to come out there and help you with this? And she said, yes, and we connected and it was good seeing her, and it was tough. I mean, we talked a lot and about a week went by and I could talk to her after I was back in New York. And then she'd really fallen down again. She was drinking again. And I was talking to a friend of hers out there and I said, we got to get her out of there. She can't just stay in that apartment and just keep drinking like this. So we got her on a plane. Mm-hmm. With her cat to New York and she came back here and we reconnected and we kind of got back together.
Hold up.
And
David, I have a question. I don't know much about you, but the stuff with the women, and I'm not trying to fuck with you or pour fuel on fire here at all. She was impregnated by another man. Is that hard for you?
Yeah. But she's also a person that I love.
Yeah.
And I knew she needed help.
Sure.
You got to put those things aside sometimes. And then when she came back, I said, I can create a safer space for her here. I'm not drinking here. I'm sober here, and she can find her own way here. She can go, get in a program here and she can find a job and so forth. Then we got back together.
Wow, cool.
And it was great for a while, but then eventually the drinking just took over, and I just didn't know. I was like, am I going to come home? And is she just going to be like, is the door to the bedroom going to be locked? And she's going to be in there with like a bottle of vodka, just like passed out and go days without bathing. I mean, it was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person who is just stunningly beautiful person. To see her in such bad shape was just devastating for me.
Yeah.
And to know that she was suffering. She didn't want to be doing this stuff. She didn't want to be drinking like that. She didn't want to, and she couldn't stop it. And it was, what's the way out of this? How can I get her the help she needs? So eventually I just got to the point where I had to reach out to her parents again. I was really scared. I was like, am I going to come home and she's just going to be dead? She had a credit card and I was like, they're going to turn this credit card off. Like she can't just keep having vodka delivered every day and not have a job. Like I knew it was getting close because I was seeing the stuff come in the mail and then the credit card was turned off and she said, it's over. This is it. I'm relieved. Now we can work on this together. Like we can figure all this out. A day or two later, she found a credit card in some drawer that had been given to her and she'd never activated it. She turned it on and bam, right back to where it was. And I was like, I can't do this.
When was this, by the way? What year?
2.5 years ago. Her father paid for her to go to rehab again. And I remember as she was leaving, she said, I don't know why you think we should still be together. And I said, well, because love is something that's very rare and is worth fighting for. And I've never stopped believing in the promise of you as a person and the promise of us as a family. I've never stopped believing in that. So she went, and then she transitioned from her rehab center to a halfway house where she is still there. February of last year, my father got sick, and we hadn't talked maybe several months at this point, this woman and I. So my father got very sick, and I said, and he went to the hospital, and I knew he wasn't getting out. I reached out to her and I just told her I was going, because I had this very overwhelming feeling of, I really want to know that the people I love are okay, because my father's dying. So we talked for a while and we kind of reconnected. And then a couple of weeks later, my father died, and I dealt with it, around the same time. Around the same time I got fired from my other job. And at this point also, I knew that she had started seeing somebody else, but I knew it wasn't too serious. I mean, at least not for the long term. I just didn't really see that, but I could have been wrong. And we started talking, and I said, well, I'm going to come down there and see you. I haven't seen you in over a year. So I went down there and I saw her, and we connected. Nothing physical happened between us, but we really had a great time. Came back and we were talking. I said, maybe I'll go down there again in a couple of months. And then she had a setback. She relapsed and was in the hospital, and she was actually in a coma, which was terrifying. And I was glad to go down there and see her. And then this happened. And then she got out of that and she came through the other side. And I went down there to see her a little while ago. And I remember us sitting in a park together after we'd gone to a yoga class together. It's kind of always been one of our things. I started talking to her about, what it was like when she was in a coma, and I lost it. I started crying, and I really got very emotional, and she got emotional, and I started talking to her about a lot of the things I worry about with her. I said, I worry about just at this point in her life is, she's 35. Where is this going? The odds at this point in her life that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, her life is going to look dramatically different are not as good as that her life would look pretty much the same in terms of where she is personally and financially and professionally and all these types of things. And I think that's a drag on her. And, we talked about these things, and I said, and how these things really affect me, because if she's in a bad place, it affects me, because I really do love her very much. And we started talking about a lot of things, about what it would be like if we had a life together again. People tell me I'm crazy, and I was like, well, you should just forget it. You should find somebody else. And I was like, well, you ever do the math on finding somebody else? Pretty bad. So I still get to this point sometimes where I'm like, well, if it's not going to be her, do I really want to keep going?
Going living or going dating?
Going living. I really do.
And as that's been on again, off again, and I really think it's done now. It just feels like time is a flat circle, and sooner or later, everybody leaves and they move on to the next thing. And I'm just here all alone, holding this bag of pain. I can't put it down, and it just consumes me. And when I talked about like just wanting the pain to go away, you're like, how do I get this pain to go away? And I just don't, there just doesn't seem to be a way to do it. And for some people, some things just might seem simple. They might seem easy. But for me, but putting down that bag of pain is just so hard. And I've never really been able to do it by myself. And that's when suicide really just it seems like it's going to be the only way to put it down. That's what it really feels like to me, where the rubber meets the pavement.
And again, I'm more grounded now than I was in those other times in my life. Those feelings are still there. I mean, I was feeling this the other day. I was like, what if she just starts dating another guy? Can I play this game for another year?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. And
I've known her for 8 years now.
Right. Yeah.
And even the on and offs, we've been through a lot together, and trying to be loyal to her even when we were apart, because she's the only person that ever really made that pain go away. I was never able to do it on my own. And there were times even in between, this is something I wanted to mention, in between, before I had met her, I tried to do some things to get myself out of that. There was a time that I went back to Tokyo, and I was like, okay, do some traveling. I went to Tokyo, and what am I doing over there? I'm doing guest chef events at Nobu and at the British Embassy. And I'm training with these world champion kickboxers, right? And I'm meeting some new people, and and I'm doing the things that I'm most passionate about in life, and I'm travel and everything should be great. And then every night I got back to my hotel room and I thought about killing myself. All of those things were just shining a light on how alone I was. I just was so alone.
I don't know if it's a myth, but that's something I don't think a lot of people consider, because they'll just say, well, just go out and do your thing, do things you enjoy, see friends. And it's like, that can backfire. You nailed it, right? It's like, so now it's like shining a light, highlighting the pain even more in a way.
And I was really struggling with this the other day. Who was I talking about this with? Steve, my best friend from when my first suicide attempt, because he's still my best friend. And he was there for me when I was getting divorced too. He's always been there for me. And I'm so incredibly lucky to have him, and some days you wake up, you feel a little better. And some days you're just like, I don't know if this is worth it. I don't know if this is ever going to end. Some of these pains, they never go away. A lot of these pains, they just never, ever go away. What's changed in me has just been my ability to deal with them. It's gotten better, but it hasn't gone away. And it's kind of like if you have cancer and the cancer is going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Every day of your life is just pain upon pain upon pain. I'm having surgery. I'm prepping for a surgery. I'm recovering from a surgery. I'm getting chemo. I'm recovering from chemo. And there's other things in your life too, right? I have my career. I have my family. I have my friends. I'm in good shape, I live in New York City and I have a nice apartment that's decorated with Japanese woodblock prints from the Meiji era, for fuck's sake. So it's kind of like when you're in the hospital and then one day LeBron James comes to the hospital and like hangs out with you, right? And you take some pictures and you have a good time and you talk to LeBron James and he's a great guy. And that day is better than yesterday, but it doesn't cure the cancer. All those other things in my life, they can only fill up that happiness bucket for me. If you have a bucket of you put all your happiness in there, everything in there except my romantic relationship aspect of it. And that happiness bucket is only getting like 20% full. So, and the rest of it is just that pain that just can become very overwhelming.
Yeah.
That's when I think to myself, is this worth it? Is this ever going to end? And it's something I still struggle with, but I've gotten better with it, I suppose, as I've developed more coping techniques through therapy, through cognitive behavioral therapy, through things like that.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's an alcoholic, managing that is part of their life forever. And I think for me, this is a part of my life forever.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a cure to it, as much as I wish there was.
So what's the likelihood that you'll be alive for 53?
It's very good.
Yeah, it sounds good.
I don't feel like I'm in that place now. When I do start feeling this, I actually go through but oftentimes I go through this sort of imaginary conversation I have in my head about telling somebody that this is what I'm going to do, but without actually saying it. Say things like, well, I'm getting my affairs in order and I need to plan for what's going to happen with some things. And, a few weeks from now when things are going to be different for everybody. And of course, that's not really what I'm trying to say, right? What I really want to say is, you're doing something that's hurting me and I want you to stop. But it doesn't seem like that's appropriately conveying how much you're hurting me. Of course, these aren't conversations I routinely have. These are just things that go on in my head. But
Right. I know you have Steve you can talk to. You have anyone else to talk to? Let's say you are ideating. Like, we're not talking about having a tough day. We're talking about hardcore stuff. Can you have a conversation with at least him or others?
Really just him in terms of in the friend space. But I also have a psychologist that I speak to weekly. I've been with her for a while and I had to lay some ground rules for some expectations I have. I think she got a little too casual with our relationship, but she's come back in the last couple of weeks. So I do think that I'm the type of person that needs to be in active therapy for extended periods of time.
You take any meds?
I do. I've done everything I could do to get myself out of this, right? Like take some ashwagandha, do some more yoga, like, turn your screens off for 2 hours before you go to bed and, spend some more time with your friends. The returns on that had maxed out. This round, I've had side effects on these things in the past. What I'm on now doesn't seem to give me any side effects. So we'll see how it goes.
You've heard the pink and purple pill question. If you take it, you just go to sleep. You don't wake up. No pain. Nobody knows it's a suicide. Essentially, it's an easy death. What do you do with it?
I say that the notion of just taking it and going to sleep and having everybody think that I just died peacefully in my sleep, for me, the act of suicide would also be my final act of communication and wanting people to know I really was in a lot of pain, that this was, I really was in pain and I really just wanted the pain to end. And that's part of it for me is.
All right, we'll change it then. We don't need to add that part to the pill. Because it's a little bit of a fuck you, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, I think that's part of it. Yeah.
You said something earlier. You said, "This is hell and I'm never getting out of it." Those were your words. This is hell and I'm never getting out of it. Now, I don't know if that makes for the best memoir title, but it resonates because I actually think in some ways, though perhaps not recently, that was pretty accurate for you in parts of your life.
I would say that the times of my life in between that first relationship where I had my first, and I say only like real suicide attempt, for that time in between when I met my future wife, I was very depressed. And then when I got divorced, it was the same thing. And then, so even now, it is ready to barge in and take over at any moment, and I don't know where the journey's going. I don't know if I'll ever get to a point where all of these other wonderful, positive things in my life will be enough. I try not to think about it too much because there's a lot of empirical data from my own life that says it won't. When I was suicidal at age 20, we could say that was a small sample size. I've been having these emotions and things for a long time. There's a definite pattern.
What else do you want to share?
There's a big misconception about people who are suicidally depressed and who commit suicide. And there's a sense that people are doing it because they're selfish, or people are doing it because they don't want to live. Some of those things may be true. I think the vast majority of times, it's not about that. And it certainly has never been about that for me. When I get suicidally depressed, when I really think about hanging myself from my pull-up bar, and I think about the lights going out and it just being a relief, that final exhale where I just don't have to do it anymore. It's not because I don't want to live. It's because I just want the pain to stop. Said this about my father. When he died, he was in the hospital. We were like, he's never going to get out of the hospital. Hooked up to machines. And I was like, it's really hard. It's like, it was probably better, right, that he died, because there's all the things that he loved in life, he was never going to do them again.
Your son is 16?
17.
0 to 10. 0 means he knows nothing about his dad's suffering. 10 means he knows everything. Where's he at? Just out of curiosity, because it's such a unique relationship.
It is a unique relationship. That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I would say he's probably at a 2 or a 3.
Right.
I really try to compartmentalize it as much as I can. When he was younger, there were times that he saw things that I wish he hadn't seen because they were just beyond my control. He saw me break down a couple of times. He saw me like just kind of, he would be in the back seat of the car and I would in his car seat, and I would just stop the car. And I remember this, and I just started crying. He was such a kind child. He would just reach up and he would hug me, and he's always been a very kind person. So he doesn't know too much about the depths of it. Although we were just chatting and I mentioned to him, that the most recent person in my life, I said, I still think about her. I still worry about her sometimes. And he said, he's 17 now. And he said, you got to let that go. You got to let it go. What I really wanted to say to him, but I didn't, was, I wish somebody would have told your stepfather that. Oh, you got to let that one go. I mean, you two have been broken up for 14 years. She's been married for 10 years. She's got a 2-year-old kid. You got to let that go. Of course, I didn't say that to him because then that would just ruin a relationship he has with his life. It's just makes it awkward. I'm not going to do that. But
I'm not picking on your kid, but like those kinds of comments almost are never helpful.
Right.
If they helped once in a while, I'd be like, all right, it's hard to know, and maybe it could help. There are things that you just never need to say because they're never going to fucking help anybody, period. And if you never uttered those words again, and I'm not really talking about your son here, I'm talking about everybody, no one would be worse off for it. So just if you could eliminate it entirely, I promise you, it would help people more, certainly not fucking hurt them. Platitudes, which I would put in that category, why do we do this? And I'm sure we're guilty of it too. We're human. It's like, why do we do this shit, man? Like, why do we say these things? You assume it's coming from a place of caring, but I don't know. I mean, with your son, I'm sure it is.
I think for him, it might be coming more from a place of frustration, that there's been this thing in my life that I just can't seem to get over. And he sees the world in the simplistic lens of a 17-year-old.
This is hard shit. This is hard stuff.
Yeah, it's very tough.
We already talked about the idea of you reached out once and that's a year later. Is there something happening this week or this month that you said, I actually want to talk to this person?
I don't think there's any one specific thing. I think maybe it's just that my life is kind of calmed down a little bit and I'm seeing maybe just dealing with things a bit more clearly. So maybe my brain is just a bit less chaotic right now.
Am I safe in assuming that nobody knows we are having this conversation other than me?
I told Steve.
Oh, you did? Okay. What did he say?
Yeah. I sent him a text, a link. I said, I'm doing this podcast tomorrow. And I think he just texted back like, wow, exclamation point or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure he and I will talk about it very soon.
He might hear it one day.
He probably will. I'm sure he will.
Are you going to listen to it, you think?
Yes. There were a lot of things that we talked about that I really hadn't talked about in many, many years. I think a lot of people you talk to, I think some of the things they're talking about are much more recent in their lives. But I think it was good. I think overall, I feel good about the experience.
Thanks for talking, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much, Sean.
All right, enjoy your day. Bye.
Bye.
As always, thanks so much for listening and all of your support. Special thanks to David in New York City. Thanks, David. If you are a suicide attempt survivor or ideator and you'd like to talk, I'd love to talk with you. Please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com. Rate and review this podcast on Apple. Check out the poll on Spotify. Show us a little love or just keep listening. Appreciate it. And that is all for this week's episode. Stay strong. Do the best you can. I will talk to you soon.